Thank you so much for joining us for our Lunch and Learn on early adopter projects that reduce the carbon impact of our built environment. Our speakers are both members of the Maine Climate Council's Buildings, Infrastructure and Housing Working Group. Ellen Belknap is president of SMRT Architects and Engineers, a full service firm designing healthcare, education, technology, science, industry, justice, government, and corporate office facilities. Jesse Thompson is a partner at Kaplan Thompson Architects in Portland, president of Maine AIA, the first architect in Northern New England to become a passive house consultant, and a LEED Accredited Professional. Next slide. My name is Kathleen Neal. I have had the honor of working with Ellen and Jesse as co-chair of the Buildings Working Group of the Maine Climate Council for the past many months, and I'm also the Director of Policy and Partnerships at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations work to protect Maine's environment and our democracy by building diverse coalitions, influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. A few technical notes for today's event. Next slide. You are all muted, but we do want to hear from you. Please send your questions as they occur to you to me through the chat. You can find the chat by hovering your mouse over the bottom of your screen, and we'll keep track of those questions to ask the presenters during the Q&A session at the end. If you have any technical difficulties, please message Will Sedlak through the chat. This event is being recorded, and the video will be posted on our website later this afternoon, along with recordings of all of our previous Lunch and Learns. Thank you again for joining us, and Ellen and Jesse, I will turn it over to you.
All right, Ellen, take it away.
Well, thank you all for joining, and thank you all for your interest in early adopter projects. Jesse and I are going to share what's happening and been accomplished in Maine. And I think the thing to remember is what we're presenting you is not esoteric, not edgy, but something that is in reach for all of us. So. Next slide, Jesse.
Oh, sorry, Ellen. There you go.
So we understand today that there's a lot of variation in Maine buildings and infrastructure and housing relative to how sustainable it really is. And what we want to share with you is projects that have proven positive steps and steps that all of us can take when we are renovating or building new. And we're going to be looking at specific areas that will help us reduce carbon in the built environment. We're going to be looking at what we call high-performing envelopes, and Jesse's going to share more detail on that. We're going to be looking at what it means to have an energy-efficient heating and cooling system. We're going to be looking at what it really means to be low or net zero ready. The use of renewables, and then we're going to introduce the concept of embodied carbon, which is becoming more and more of an issue in construction, and it speaks to what materials we use and their origin and what it took in terms of carbon to get the material to a job site. And finally, we're going to look at Maine's built environment and share with you 5 projects that have achieved significant carbon reduction that are in our state today. Just a quick note on Maine and the rest of the United States, and you will see where the, if you call them wedges of the pie are in terms of carbon. And Maine is heavily transportation related in terms of our carbon but we are looking at the 18% and 10% that addresses residential and commercial. And in Maine, those are higher percentages than you see in the rest of the United States. So that is the wedge, the 18 and 10% that come from heating and cooling and building residential and commercial properties that we can impact in terms of the carbon of the built environment that we're all working on together.
And this is this main issue, which is that if you look at Maine compared to the country, we drive a huge amount. We burn huge amounts of gasoline in our state, and we drive back and forth to single family houses that are heated by oil. So Maine has an oil boiler problem, and it has a car problem and a truck problem. And that is, you know, when you look at those wedges, why is our residential sector so much more carbon emitting than the rest of the country? It's fuel oil. And it's oil boilers, and the rest of the country uses a lot more natural gas and electricity to heat and cool themselves. Maine is a very dirty state for our houses, and then the houses are spread out and you drive a long way to get to them. So this is what's unique that we've been digging into in the Climate Council. And so this is an example. This is an apartment building in Falmouth. It's about 2-3 years old that our office built with the Vesta Housing. And this is a building that hits all of the governor's climate goals. This building is electrically heated and cooled. It uses air source heat pumps. So there is some fossil fuel use in this building, and that is honestly, it's for showers and water heating. That was a stretch for an affordable housing, but this is a building that had to fit into Falmouth, Maine, and look elegant and also meet the carbon goals. And it's been sort of sitting there happily working away. And this was built for affordable housing budgets. There was no extra money on this project at all over a conventional project. And our group is also, we have a spinoff called BrightBuiltHome, and that is trying to tackle the homes in Maine. And Ellen and I focused this conversation on new construction. I think all of us know we're not going to build our way out of this issue. We really need, and the Climate Council's done an enormous amount of work on how do we increase weatherization, how do we fix all the existing homes in Maine. But the new construction that we do can be built to higher standards. And we wanted to show some examples of this is a net zero home built in Maine for conventional construction prices, and warm, happy, and healthy.
Jesse, a quick definition of net zero.
Thank you, Ellen. It is a building that produces as much energy as it uses in a year. And it's net zero over the year. So in the winter, it is importing electricity, and the summer, it's giving its neighbor lots of clean power. So the neighbors all around this are using its clean power in the summer. And on balance, it is a zero energy building. Zero energy, yeah, go ahead.
It is connected to the grid.
Absolutely. There's no, this isn't an off the grid hippie cabin in the woods. It's a normal house. And importantly, the reason people don't do better than net zero is because there is essentially, if you make more energy than you use, CMP keeps it. You're not allowed to be a power producer in Maine more than you use, and that is an industry fight, not a technical challenge. So, and all of this is possible because, I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime, that in the last 10 years, not even the last 30 years, in the last 10 years, solar panels have dropped 75% in price. I mean, it is mind-boggling that a thing that 10 years ago in 2008 just does not feel like very long ago. And it's dropped 75%. And that's why you're seeing solar so much. That's why you're seeing your neighbors put solar panels on. That's why you're seeing solar farms. That's why you're seeing so much uptake. I mean, Ellen, and the building on the right is a great example.
Yeah, this is for anybody who's driven through Bangor lately. Bangor Savings built a new headquarters there, and we used geothermal heat pumps, and we covered the roof of the garage with PV because it was cost effective.
Yeah, 3 years ago you wouldn't have done this.
No.
And it has turned, and I think this is a very hard thing for all of us to grapple with is when things change faster than we were expecting, it's hard to catch up. It's hard for your brain to get around this idea that solar used to be expensive, but a good thing to do for the planet. Now it's just cheaper. It is just cheaper than any other form of electricity we're making in Maine. And that's very disruptive and strange. And then here comes the next thing, which is that electric vehicles, again, sort of expensive, strange, you've heard about them. There's that fancy company out in California who sells luxury cars. Well, Kia is now selling them. And if you put 4 solar panels on your roof, it will drive you 1,500 miles. This is the cheapest driving you can do is in an electric car right now. And the cleanest driving by far. And so when we combine this with the graph we showed you in the beginning, this is a key thing out there.
So we mentioned embodied carbon, and just, the quick cliff notes here is the world has been focusing on operational carbon, which is heating, cooling, keeping the lights on, driving your car. It's fuel you consume that warms up the planet that is causing trouble. That's operational carbon. The embodied carbon, another way to think of it is hidden carbon or the carbon loophole. There are materials that are carbon intensive in their extraction, in their manufacture, in their transport, and in their construction. So making cement and making steel cement is a chemical reaction that produces carbon, and steel takes a tremendous amount of heat and energy to take from the ground into the mill and ready to build out of it. So steel and cement are sort of culprits in terms of carbon, and there are materials that are emerging as an alternative that could really help us tackle this embodied hidden carbon. And Jesse, on the next slide, you'll see a comparison of engineered wood, and engineered wood is a win on 2 fronts. Wood sequesters carbon. If we use wood in construction, we're actually sequestering, we're holding carbon. And then you can see concrete, and then you can see steel. So you see the carbon impact of these 3 different products. And this graph, thanks to Passive House, compares sort of an equal unit of these products, and you can see the relative carbon impact. So it begs the question, and this is a huge opportunity for Maine, is where can we appropriately substitute engineered wood for concrete and steel in our construction? And this is an area where, again, the industry is has an opportunity. We haven't grabbed it completely yet, and there are reasons the availability of engineered wood is not as readily achievable in Maine as concrete and steel. And also, contractors know steel, contractors know concrete, they're familiar with products, and it's easy to keep doing what we know how to do. So
the key concept Ellen's talking about is that if we build a whole bunch of net zero buildings out of concrete and steel, we emit carbon dioxide right now. And they may be energy savings over their lifetime, but that emissions happens right when you build them. If we can build buildings out of wood right now, they capture carbon dioxide out of the air. It's also why, in terms of preservation, you want to preserve your heavy old buildings, your brick buildings, your concrete, your steel buildings. Those are the ones you really want to, on just a pure energy, let alone sacred history, but those are the ones that are important. You've already sunk. Carbon emissions happened by our ancestors. Don't sink those.
So at this point, what we'll do is we'll turn our attention to 5 projects in Maine that have a good carbon story, where we have achieved results either using specific materials or specific systems. And these are projects that we have selected because they are readily achievable. They are not esoteric. They are not built at you know, crazy high cost per square foot. They are built to a budget, and they are examples of what we can do much more of in the state of Maine. So Essex Woods is a housing project that Avesta is building out in Portland, and they are using engineered wood for their stair towers and their elevator shafts. So the vertical shafts in the building are built out of a product called cross-laminated timber, CLT. And that is a product that cannot yet be manufactured in Maine. This product for this project was imported from Montana. And if you go to the next slide, Jesse, you will see that there is, despite the fact that the CLT was shipped from Montana, because the project did not have to incur temporary heating or hire a mason, we were able to save time, labor, and the energy that temporary heating costs. And we were able to save, or the project was able to save $75,000 despite incurring $40,000 in shipping the CLT from Montana to Maine, not to speak of the fuel burned shipping that CLT. So this is an interesting opportunity for Maine, because 87 to 90% of Maine is forest, and we have wood here. We have plenty of wood in Maine, and we have the wood that we can use to make cross-laminated timber. If we could have a plant in the state of Maine, we would not incur that $40,000 in shipping costs. Now, there's all kinds of steps between Maine and a CLT plant, but this is an opportunity for us to consider, and it's a product that can replace concrete masonry. And if you've been building in Maine recently, you will understand how difficult it is to find a mason. So, you know, this is an industry in transition, an industry that is ripe for innovation around this issue of transitioning to a new product for a lot of different construction areas. The vertical shafts in buildings traditionally have had to be made of masonry. And so this is one of the first projects that is using essentially an experimental product, but it's not experimental in any way, shape, or form in terms of its performance or its ability to meet code or any of the things we need to look at as we engineer new buildings. So great opportunity for me.
Ellen, I fully expect to see big 5 to 6 to 7 story buildings being built in downtown Portland out of all timber and no steel within 5 years. And one other thing to note is that this building is built on Brighton Avenue in Portland, across the street from a metro line. You don't need a car if you live here, and this is the housing we need in Maine. There's a desperate housing shortage in Portland for affordable or any kind of housing, and housing that you can build out of wood in places where you don't need a car, that solves all the wedges we're talking about.
This is another very interesting project. It is in Farmington, Maine, and it is elderly housing. And this project, I talked to Herb Semple, the architect, and he basically said, it's built with things you can buy at Home Depot. It's not an esoteric project. There's nothing edgy about it, but it is, from an energy standpoint, it is using geothermal, it is using PV. You see the PV, the photovoltaics on the roof. And next slide, you can see basically it's a pretty simple building. It's federally subsidized housing. It was built at a low cost per square foot. It is a net zero all electric building. So it is connected to the grid, but for Jesse's definition of that net zero, it's not, it is producing as much as it's using. And the way it was done was with photovoltaic and geothermal wells and radiant floor heating. All, again, nothing experimental here, pretty accessible to all of us. And again, standard, simple systems, standard building materials. And it won an award for outstanding affordable housing. So it can be done.
And it's in Farmington, which is not warm.
Right, good point.
Bayside Anchor is a project down in Bayside in Portland, and it is an apartment building that does a lot of heavy lifting. It has a head start on the ground floor. It has a community police office. It has the first 12 families who moved in were all formerly homeless. It's an Avesta housing project. But in terms of this conversation, it is the one of the first 2 passive house apartment buildings in Maine. And it is built to a German low energy standard that basically you can heat a bedroom in this building with a 100-watt light bulb. It's that efficient, it's that well built that the heating has almost gone away as an issue in buildings of this quality. And this was built for $142 a square foot in 2016. So built for 20% less than most other apartment buildings in Portland at the time, at the same time that it hit these sort of global levels of energy savings. And this passive house standard is something the Maine Climate Council has indeed been looking at as, if we can do this with these buildings, maybe we should be incentivizing this for all affordable housing. Maybe this should be a policy that governs even commercial construction in Maine. But it's an example of a building that's been happily sitting there for 4 years, humming along at this incredibly low operation and construction, and it's built out of wood, so it's a low carbon material as well. And you know, BrightBuiltHome was a homegrown Maine effort that works with modular manufacturers in Maine, people like KDS Building Solutions in South Paris and Oxford, and it delivers modular homes that can all be net zero and are built for the same price as other custom homes. You know, we're doing about 25 to 30 homes a year all over Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and it's just a readily available, normal, everyday, single-family home system. You know, beautiful and bright and cheery on the inside, using all wood construction, and it's buy one now. But we've it's been an example to us of, it took a few years of getting the technical systems right, but now we know that this and other manufacturers are humming right along doing net zero homes out there, and proving that this is within the budgets of just about normal home construction. It doesn't take, the technical problems are pretty much all solved at this point.
Jesse, what percentage of the materials are Maine based?
So when the framing lumber is absolutely there. We're using Maine-based window products quite often. People like Matthews Brothers and Paradigm Windows. We try to use as much Maine flooring as we can, and Maine timbers. It's you know, the construction industry has complicated supply chains, so a lot of things are flowing from all over the world, especially lighting and mechanical systems. But it's one of the nice things is that Maine single-family construction can be built from a lot of materials that come right from here. And cellulose insulation, so wood fiber insulation blown into the walls is another very healthy material that is also another Maine forest product.
Good, and the last project we want to share is actually one that's in design, and this is a residence hall and student success center at USM. And we're very pleased to have a client that is asking us and urging us to think about using CLT, which we are using, and to building this to the same standard that Jesse was referring to a passive house standard in terms of energy. And this will be on the USM campus, and the cost of heating and cooling this can then be passed on to the students in terms of savings in the cost of renting a room and going to college. So you think of making education affordable, you think of student housing and trying to make student housing affordable. You start with the energy it takes to heat and cool your room, And then you think of the carbon impact of standing up large construction. And it's a great story in terms of cross-laminated timber as well. And every time we don't need to use steel and we can introduce wood, it again is all to the carbon good. So, you know, for a large institution like USM to be embracing, you know, reducing carbon as a major goal of this project, we were very, very, very pleased to see. And I think more and more we are able to educate clients who are tackling large projects and seeing the benefits of out the gate managing both their embodied carbon, so the upfront carbon in the materials they're using, and in the carbon it takes to heat and cool and keep the lights on. So all to the good, and we are, you know, part of moving the industry to doing more and more of this. And the more examples we can have of this, the more we're going to have a positive impact on carbon in the state of Maine. So just a quick wrap up, and then Jesse and I are looking forward to your questions. But there are huge opportunities both in renovating buildings and building new to do it without spending more than you would anyway. If you're going to build something or renovate something, that's the time to make the good carbon decision, and to know that it is achievable and that we can essentially leave Maine in a better carbon position if we use high-performing envelopes, use renewables, understand the carbon impact of the materials we're using, and understand the carbon impact of the systems that we put in place to heat and cool our buildings, and the integrity of the exterior envelope that allows us to reduce the cooling and heating loads to begin with. So Jesse, you may have some final comments as well.
Yeah, and I think it's just been, you know, here we are, we're talking to an advocacy organization. You know, essentially what Ellen and I were tasked with also was, this is some of the best examples that we've seen in Maine of Maine innovation and Maine companies who are really trying to push on this, and things that Ellen and I, our groups have tried to work on as well. But that we know the rest of the state can do this, and Maine is a very conservative state. Doesn't change that quickly. It's one of our huge benefits, but it also means that what we think should be one of the big pushes is that we need a better building code. Maine didn't have a building code 20 years ago. And so we now have a unified building code, but we need support for, there's legislation which automatically updates our building code every year, and the Climate Council has seen this as we need what new construction happens to be built to absolute high standards, and that needs help. I mean, the North American Home Builders Association fights Maine's building code every single cycle, and the subdivision builders come out against this aggressively, and we need a counterweight always to say new buildings should be built better, and renovated buildings should be renovated healthily and smartly, so that people have healthy buildings to live in. So those are, I think, some of the big policy pieces. And I also will say that, you know, lurking behind what Ellen and I look at is where we place our buildings is really important. We saw the wedge in Maine. It is about us driving back and forth between our buildings. It's where our carbon emissions are. It's like moving back and forth between buildings is a huge, huge part of the wedge. So we need people like Maine conservation voters to advocate in all their towns to be allowed to build buildings in our downtowns. And it is, you know, it's not if you are in Wiscasset or Damariscotta or, you know, Farmington, and you want to build a building in downtown, it's honestly a bit of a challenge these days. It's much easier to build a house out in the woods, or to build a house, or to build a single family house in the middle of downtown than it is to build a building where lots of people can live there and not have to have cars all they need. So there's an advocacy about where we build our buildings that should really be going on. If we really are going to tackle that 50%, we're not all going to buy electric cars. You know, it would be nice to not need a car all the time. Those are a few things. And then I think also support for this cross-laminated timber. We have this Maine timber products industry that District 2 could be selling products to Boston. Boston is going to, Maine doesn't build that many big buildings. You know, this cross-laminated timber is for big buildings. It's a steel replacement. But we need Millinocket to be selling products when Boston tries to fix its carbon problem. And they need to come shopping to Maine and not Montana. And so anything we can do to get these advanced timber production methods in Maine would be a major, major step for the whole East Coast. And that needs smart forest management, and it needs, but we're sitting there ready and right around to turn a corner on this. And I think that's where a group like this that can advocate inside the state to figure out, you know, how do we get this up and running?
And it's a job. I mean, the steel comes from out of state too. We don't do steel. And so here is a way to, you know, an economic boost in terms of employment, both extracting the wood and manufacturing the wood, that will leave the state stronger and stronger from a carbon standpoint. So good on so many levels.
And these are good jobs as well. These construction jobs are good jobs. They can pay really well. University of Maine has one of the best timber engineering programs in the country. So you've got a school ready to support this effort. You've got a workforce that needs training to do these jobs, to build these buildings. It's a way to have a win-win across economy and carbon and the environment all in one sector. Anything else, Ellen, or is that it? That's our show.
No, I think we look forward to questions.
Yeah.
Jesse, if you would end screen sharing and I'll take back over, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you both so much. What a fascinating presentation, and we had just a ton of questions come in while you guys were talking, and feel free to keep questions coming my way. Before we get to them, we mentioned at the top of the hour that Ellen and Jesse both served on the Buildings Working Group. And today we're asking all of you to check out the strategies that group proposed to the Maine Climate Council. We will share a link to those recommendations and a survey about how they might fit in your community in a follow-up email this afternoon. This survey, along with surveys for about all of the draft strategies proposed by other working groups, is one of the primary ways that the public can really weigh in on the new climate action plan. So please take a few minutes to look at that. And if you do have any questions, you can always reach out to us for thoughts on completing it. All right, let's get into some questions. So let's talk about building codes a little bit. We spent a lot of time talking about building codes in our working group. And folks on the call are wondering about what obstacles there are in current building codes that might inhibit the adoption of some of these newer technologies and practices. And particularly, are there concerns about, the fire code concerns about engineered wood or anything like that?
I can take the engineered wood question in terms of code, and Jesse, I think the obstacles in terms of code, happy for you to jump in on that one. On the engineered wood, the cross-laminated timber, there is new code approved for adoption that will allow up to 18-story buildings to be built out of engineered wood. So this is an enormous change, and we're starting to see on the West Coast these 18-story buildings actually being built. And so we are no longer on a national level up against not being able to do it. It is proven technology, and the International Building Code, the IBC that we build to, is allowing it. We will need a formal adoption of it in Maine, but it is the heavy lifting has been done in terms of it has been proven, it is safe, it is fire safe. We are no longer debating whether you can build an 18-story building out of wood and it meet the fire resistant requirements. So that piece we have achieved. Jesse, you want to talk about the overall?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what we've seen is that the overall issue is that there's a group of people in Maine who fight against every improvement in building code. And so there's a group of folks who will always show up and say, you're increasing the costs on Mainers to increase your requirements. And that's just, I've been doing this a little while now, and it's been the statement ever for decades. And it's never been true, because the savings to Maine people with these better buildings are always larger than the construction cost increases. And living in a house with mold in it, or a house that you can't afford to heat, is a disaster for Mainers, and it's been a disaster for decades. So the push to always exempt these large home builders from ever having to meet a more advanced standard is the push that these happen in these small committees, in these technical rooms, and there's not a lot of the public who shows up to fight for these things. If 5 people show up to say, this is absolutely great, we should absolutely be advancing the building code, I'm a normal homeowner, I would happily, this makes sense to me, that moves committees in a state like Maine, instead of the lobbyists from NAHB sitting there saying, like, this is going to destroy every home builder in the state. That's the biggest impediment we see over and over again, is that there's this kind of not wanting to keep current. We are currently on the 2015 code, and it's 2020. And we feel pretty good about only being 5 years behind where the rest of the country is.
That's a big improvement from where we were.
We were 2009 a couple of years ago. So we've gone from 11 years behind, only 5 years behind. But that movement of that's going to always be the friction, and that's where people who show up at the like the MUBEC board. If you Google MUBEC, you can find the hearings you're supposed to show up for. So that's my pitch.
Jesse, is it fair to say that we're in a sort of better place in the curve now than we were 5 years ago in terms of?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Adoption. I mean, I think the needle is trending in the right direction.
It is, but our former governor exempted every town of less than 2,000 people from the building code altogether. And that's a heck of a lot of Mainers live in towns with less than 2,000 people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so there's
that's one of the other questions we had was what needs to be done to revise building codes to approach net zero or passive house type standards, and hearing that reminder of how far we are even from current building codes or what's current in other states. I will just put in a plug to all of you when you check out that survey. There is a question about improving the design and construction of new buildings, and that's the place to say, yes, we want that no matter what town we live in.
And Kathleen, I would add that the code is the place to make the change. If it's going to be optional and not code, it is very important for me to be able to tell a client, the code requires this. It is important that building to net zero is just what we have to do.
And what we've heard also over and over again is the Maine local town inspectors need the funding to train their inspectors, and they really need help with education of builders and training of builders, and we need licensing of contractors in Maine. We need contractors to have to get a license so that when they build bad buildings, they could get their license revoked. And right now, contractors in Maine don't have to be licensed. There is no test you have to pass. There's no rule. There's no nothing. It's the Wild West. So that's the other thing we've heard as well. That's a fight, I think, worth fighting.
And I think this goes straight to an equity issue also, because a building that's not built to a high energy code level costs more to heat and cool. and that cost is passed on to the homeowner. And it's often the most vulnerable homeowner who ends up in that house and pays more than they need to for heating and cooling. So, you know, if we're going to think about the equity of this, changing that code is absolutely critical to address the vulnerable populations in Maine.
That brings us to one of the other questions we had, which was how much can we actually reduce operating costs for residents by using these technologies?
You can make it go away. I mean, you know, I think that's what a net zero home, you don't have bills because it's inside your mortgage. You know, the thing that makes all your electricity is inside your mortgage and stable and safe for 30 years. If you can pay your mortgage, you don't have a bill. So we can make utility costs go away to Mainers. Now that obviously requires solar to keep getting cheaper, and we need ways of financing this. And people being able to finance clean energy at low rates would be an amazing lever. That you could pay less for clean energy than for dirty energy. And that would be an incredible way to move the needle.
There's also an underlying physical health benefit to this. You know, these buildings are healthier buildings to live in. They're healthier buildings to work in. And perhaps we haven't emphasized that enough, but it's a win-win in terms of carbon, but it's a win-win in terms of the health of the occupants of the building as well.
Yeah, it's always a little frustrating when folks fight against better buildings and you think, you know, in an ice storm, that better building stays warmer longer. It's a lot safer to live in when you're not worried about your pipes freezing.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk more about cross-laminated timber. There was a question about the CO2 emission equivalent, that chart that you put up, and whether that is a fair comparison. So is a kilogram of concrete or steel a direct comparison with a kilogram of wood in terms of construction?
Yeah, I will have to be absolutely transparent on that chart. I need to know more. Actually, I have some similar questions about that chart. How much wood does it take to span from A to B, and how much steel and how much concrete? And really, I need to unpack that chart more. It is fair to say that a cross-laminated timber building that is not built with steel or concrete does two things. It sequesters carbon, and you don't incur the carbon impact of extracting and manufacturing the steel and concrete. But in terms of the actual dollars and the actual numbers, I think we need to do further analysis.
But what you see is when the gulf is from this to this, even if you're off by twice as much on the little one,
right?
It's that movement we need. You know, this is the change, this drastic change happening quickly that all the scientists say is like, this needs to move fast. So we know it's better, it's significantly better. And we know that it locks up carbon dioxide instead of emitting. So those two things are just sitting right there for us.
Yeah, the other piece for cross-laminated timber that, so Zachow Construction is building Essex Woods, and in conversations with Zachow Construction, they basically shared with me that the savings isn't just in, you know, in the CLT versus a material savings. It's actually a savings in time and a savings in temporary heat. And in construction, time is dollars. So if you can build a building in 10 months instead of 15 months, you will pay less per square foot, because every month you incur general conditions. And if you can reduce that, you're going to reduce the cost of your building. And then the cost of your building becomes reducing the cost of your mortgage. So, you know, again, it can be a net gain, not just for carbon, but for the base cost of putting up any new construction or renovation. So that
I will also say, we're kind of doing this technical talk here. about the carbon values of these buildings. But what we also know is that when we walk in wood buildings, they make us feel good. And an old mill building with wood ceiling and wood timbers, you know, it feels different than a steel and concrete building. And so I think there are these other values that we sort of know that and we can expose it. Like, wouldn't you rather see the structural frame of a building than have it all hidden up in drywall and acoustic ceiling? So those aspects, you know, we're doing a project right now for the ecology school in Saco, and it's uses heavy timber, and you know, it's like a glue lam timber for their common hall. And when you walk in the dining hall, it feels good. It feels nice. And it also is sequestering carbon. But it's, you know, Mainers built it with tools, and it didn't come from a steel plant in the Midwest. You know, there's other good things. There's a reason we love timber frames and wood buildings in this state.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we also love our old buildings. And there were a few questions about what folks who live in an existing building can do, and whether that's green renovation or ways to incorporate some of these technologies as we think about the buildings that we already have.
And that's what on the working group we've been staring at. Is we have hundreds of thousands of buildings in Maine that exist, and they often have oil boilers in their basement, and they are often not particularly healthy or affordable to live in, and we need to really focus on that. And so Maine has been one of the pioneers in weatherization of how to improve the energy use of existing buildings. That funding during the Obama administration was growing quite a bit during the last recession. And then that funding was pulled. And all those weatherizing contractors, all of a sudden their businesses vanished. They had, you know, built up these businesses, they were fixing Mainers' homes, they were moving through the state really well, and then they got the, you know, legs knocked out from underneath them. And so one thing we're recommending is we really need to get that weatherization work back, but we need to really fight for a 20-year plan. That if you go into business, you have to have a sense that your business might survive for 10 or 20 years if you're a young person who's really passionate about fixing buildings. And so there needs to be a stable source of, you've got to have a job doing this work, because we know all the technical things to do. There's a manual, you know, it's this beautiful manual. Here's how to fix an old home in Maine. Just follow these rules. It really is about funding and resources and dollars, so that people are willing to go into business to go fix all our buildings.
I think one of the messages here is that lots of the technical problems have been solved. I mean, and those are the projects we shared with you today. But it's to get from the technical to every Mainer having access and understanding the mechanisms available to make these changes and the cost. And I think one of the promising things was the chart that we showed about the precipitous drop in the cost of solar PV, solar photovoltaic, because it is within reach now. It is not esoteric. It is not something that, you know, really is you know, prohibitively expensive, and you can't even think about it unless you are just going to build some high-end luxury building. That is not the situation, but we still need to figure out how to get that technology to people who need it. And some of it is the price drops so fast. Not everyone knows how low the price has gone. So there's some real education around the accessibility of some of this technology.
Yeah, there really is. It's a funny thing of, you know, that you could, if you look at solar panels as an investment, where if you had the means to put $10,000 in some investment somewhere, say you could do that as a Mainer, you get 10% returns off of solar panel in Maine. You know, you're getting $1,000 of value every year as long as it goes on. There's an immediate return on investment. That's a thing that simply wasn't true, even 5 years ago.
No.
But right now, it's probably the safest investment you could do to your house in terms of returns and money back. You know, CMP has to buy your power from you. They might not like it, but they have to. And they have to pay you retail for it, luckily, because this administration has pushed for it under our current administration. You know, that wasn't true even just 3 or 4 years ago. So those are things that are sitting right in front of us right now. And yes, there are equity issues, and we need to make sure that all Mainers can have access to this. But yeah, like Ellen's saying, the technical problems are solved. It's a matter of letting people know it's possible, that this is all possible right now. We can actually do this. It's not insoluble. You do have to work at it, though.
Jesse, is there any movement on if we did build to net positive instead of net zero? If people were able to produce more than they need, I know right now it's capped. CMP won't buy it back. Is there any movement on changing that?
I mean, I'm not super policy involved, but it sure sounds like it was a fight to keep net zero legislation over the last few years. The LePage administration tried to remove it altogether, and they tried to get rid of that policy. And so I think the last few years have been a bit of getting back to where we were 8 years ago. and then had a pandemic hit, you know, just little things like that. So
just minor details,
yeah. But, you know, we're all thankful this administration's helping us with the pandemic rather than others we could pick.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And, you know, we had a couple of questions about who should we be talking to about how, you know, how do we get a CLT plant in Maine? Or which state senators, which state representatives should we be lobbying when we talk about those building codes? And I know that's a little out of your purview generally, but you guys put in so much work through the buildings working group over the last many months. Do you have a sense of where the pressure points are, or what the current administration really needs to hear to move these recommendations forward?
Personally, I would say when you're in the rooms, what you hear grumblings about are that, yeah, that's just a Southern Maine thing. That's just those rich towns. They're the only ones who want this. And we know that isn't true. We know that Mainers all over the state care about these issues, and especially in rural districts. And I think so Mainers who live in more rural districts with perhaps more conservative representatives and can get the push to them, that is what moves the needle. When legislators who are in places that appear like more rural conservative spots hear this message over and over again, it lets them support these things easier. And it helps counteract that impression, which we just sort of know isn't true. It's not a urban Maine versus rural Maine question. It's just a general widespread feeling. But people go back to these old stereotypes in the meetings. You hear it quite often, the rumbling about Southern Maine versus the rest of Maine talk. So that's my instinct, is that, you know, District 2 folks, push on your representatives. Does a lot.
I also think to the specific question about, you know, what it will take to get a CLT plant in Maine. I mean, some of it is just education. I mean, like, just for this group to understand the benefit to the state of celebrating our forest economy, growing green jobs. But a plant is expensive. You know, upwards of $50 million to stand up a plant and buy the press to actually press the, basically, CLT is pieces of wood stacked together and then glued in, you know, in cross directions to make it strong. And it's glued and pressed, and you need a huge press. And Maine doesn't have the market yet. So you're not seeing a lot of CLT buildings standing up in Maine. The market is still concrete and steel. So to think of spending $50 million to put up a plant, but not having a robust market, that's a risky move for a smart lamb from Montana to consider moving to Maine and doing that. So some of it is we need to build the market so that it makes economic sense to spend the money to build a plant. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. I do think we're starting in the right place. As Jesse said, we've got the science absolutely down, and we celebrate that at the University of Maine through our advanced manufacturing center, the work that the scientists at Maine are doing is proving this technology again and again. And we've got students trained to understand how to engineer this wood. So we are in so many ways positioned for it. But we've got to flow dollars to the risk of standing up a plant. And right now, there's a few other things we need to flow dollars to. So I think we may be in a little bit of a holding pattern in terms of the risk-reward equation. But we're starting in the right place, which is education.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank one of our participants who reminded me that this is a particularly good point to share that our environmental scorecard was released just yesterday. So I just dropped that link in the chat. If you're curious about where your state senator or state representative stands on some of these issues, you can follow that link and look them up. We will, of course, have a new legislature seated in January, and those are the folks who will be confronted with a lot of these questions, because the working group recommendations that Jesse and Ellen and about 250 some other hardworking Maine people put in volunteer time to develop through the working group process. Those recommendations are now in the hands of the Climate Council, which will put together a climate action plan, which is due to the legislature in December. And a lot of the policies that we'll need to carry out that plan will come up in the next session. So check out the scorecard to see where your current representatives stand, and stay tuned, because in just a couple of weeks, MCB will be releasing our endorsements for folks who are running in November. We are so grateful to all of you for joining us today. As I said earlier, we will send out an email later this afternoon with some links that you can help follow up. We really appreciate your feedback, so please take a few minutes to fill out a little survey that we'll send around. If you enjoyed today's conversation, you should definitely plan to tune in next week. Judy East, who is the co-chair of the Community Resilience Planning, Emergency Management and Public Health Working Group of the Maine Climate Council, will join us for sort of a similar conversation about the recommendations that came out of that working group and how we can all move those forward. Ellen and Jesse, thank you a million times over for a really fascinating presentation and for all of your hard work. We're really grateful to have you all leading the charge in Maine buildings. And thanks to everybody for joining us. Have a great weekend, folks.
Thank you.